All right, Greg here again. This lesson is step 2 of my 5-step process that I use to help people get to reliable moderation. As always, I'm going to repeat the premise of this is that unwanted drinking that we do against our will, is in reaction to, is a way to solve for some sort of discomfort. And so the previous lesson talked quite a bit about what that discomfort is, and it talked about how to pay attention to that discomfort so you can start to understand what it is. As I've said before, the goal of this process is to get to a point where it's easy and natural to drink moderately. Unfortunately, the path to that involves some constraint. Not actually, unfortunately. There's a lot of good to be had from developing the skill of setting and keeping to constraints. So you're going to learn that from this. And so this is really the one step that focuses on the drinking side of the equation. Most of my process focuses on managing the discomfort, but with constraints we're going to talk about actually not drinking even when you want to. So the constraints that I'm going to tell you about and tell you how to set are, one, easier to stick to. They're stronger. They give you more conviction, more power to follow through with. And secondly, they create an opportunity for a really valuable learning experience when you don't stick to them. So if this process counted on constraints working 100% of the time, then it wouldn't be a very good or useful process. It wouldn't work. So we want to take advantage of I would say the near inevitability that there's going to be times that you set constraints and you fail. That's okay. So this process I'm going to describe creates an opportunity for that. So good constraints have the following aspects. One, they're realistic. My assumption that the people that I can best help, that I work with, aren't facing any existential problems because of their drinking. There's not a huge urgency to fix the problem now. And assuming that's true for you, I want you to abandon the idea that you're going to set constraints that are going to solve the problem tomorrow and make it go away. And so what I mean by realistic constraints is constraints that meet you where you are, that support a sort of a patient and a methodical and a planned reduction in your drinking as you build up your skill at not drinking. So first is that they're realistic. You're not going to use these constraints to all of a sudden become somebody who goes from 30 drinks a week to 8. It's not going to work that way. The second aspect of good constraints is that they are immediate. And I have a very specific meaning in mind when I say this. The way I tell people to, or teach people to set constraints, is decide today what you're going to drink tomorrow. And tomorrow, decide what you're going to drink the next day, and so on. So this is really very different than kind of creating some rules where you say, I'm going to cut my drinking back to 12 drinks a week, or I'm only going to drink on the weekends, or I'm only going to have 1 beer a night on weekdays henceforth. That kind of rule setting and constraint setting really doesn't work that well, but if you'll adopt this practice of today setting a realistic constraint for tomorrow that takes into account what's going to happen tomorrow. Maybe you anticipate it's going to be a very stressful day and you're at a point in your life where you want to be able to have a drink to deal with that stress. Set your constraint accordingly. Maybe it's going to be, maybe tomorrow's Tuesday and normally you wouldn't drink on a Tuesday, but you're going to meet with an old friend and you want to have a couple drinks. Set your constraint accordingly. So immediate. Plan today for tomorrow. Some people I work with will do their planning in the morning. That can be okay, planning in the morning for the evening. I don't like that as much. And it definitely is not ideal if you're waking up hungover in the morning and if you're really feeling generally bad about yourself or bad physically in the morning. That's really not the best place to set these constraints. So preferred is today, plan for tomorrow. The third aspect of good constraints are that they are precise. So a precise constraint would be something like, I'm going to have 3 drinks tomorrow, and I'm not going to have the first one before 6. And regardless of whether I've had 3 or not, I'm not going to have any after 10 o'clock. A constraint that's not precise would be to say, I'm going to have 2 or 3 drinks tomorrow. The precise constraint, it's so much more powerful. It gives you so much more conviction that the 2 or 3 tomorrow, actually it doesn't do anything to constrain you to stick with 2. So you'll have 2, and you'll probably go ahead and have the third because, hey, it's within your constraint, it's okay. But then you'll have the third, and you'll be thinking, I should have stopped at 2, so already going to be feeling a little guilty and stressed about yourself. So a precise constraint is much easier to stick to. This applies both to quantity and time. And secondly, a precise constraint gives you a real clear measure of if you're winning and succeeding or if you're failing. And I'll talk about in a minute why that's important. So precise constraints. And finally, you want to set these constraints from a place of love for yourself, for appreciation that you're taking on a challenging task, that you're setting yourself up for some discomfort and some maybe even for a chance for short-term failure, for setbacks. You want to have compassion for yourself. If you set these constraints from a place of punishment and of self-loathing and other negative emotions, they're going to have a lot less power. When tomorrow comes and you're dealing with the constraint, that emotion, that energy is going to be present. It's going to feel like a punishment. You may feel rebellious. So if you'll really take care of the attitude with which you set these constraints, it's going to make a difference. Think of it this way. When you are setting a constraint, you're setting up a transaction between 2 different parties, 2 different versions of you in time. When you set the constraint, it's the version of you now versus the future you. And then this transaction is going to be concluded one way or the other when the person of you is kind of interacting with, through the constraint that's been written down, this version of himself from yesterday. And the best transactions, the best business transactions, the best any kind of transactions occur between people who know and trust and understand each other. And these 4 parameters are going to set the stage or create the foundation for that most productive transaction. And finally, realize that the purpose of these constraints is not only to help you drink less. They will do that, but they also provide a guideline for when and how to pay attention. This is the first step, observing. And so one of the times where you really want to pay attention is when you are bumping up against your precise constraint. You plan to, or let's say you plan to not have a drink before 6, and now it's 5 o'clock, and you're thinking about it. It's a good time to pay attention. What are you feeling? What is the discomfort that you're trying to solve for? What are the rationalizations that you're making? That's where you're going to collect some good data about yourself. Or if you've had your 3rd drink, it's 9 o'clock and you're considering a 4th. Again, that's a damn good time to pay attention. So the precision, this is one of the reasons the precision is important, not only for the strength of the conviction, but because it gives you a very precise moment in time when you've got the opportunity to learn some really critical information about yourself. So down below this, there's going to be a link to actually the kind of a written protocol with a worksheet that my clients use. Check that out. It provides a sort of a structure that you can use to make this easy. I encourage you to do that, and there's even going to be a link to a whole lesson in that if you want to go even deeper into specifically how I guide my clients in working through that process. All right. See you soon for lesson 3.